My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be The Poetic Novel 2, that is Part 2, Video 10, The Introverted Novel. The Introverted Novel. So here's the book from which I'll be reading an essay. The Poetic Novel 2, Influences and Elements, 3 Yellow Roses. A rose is a rose is a rose, said Gertrude Stein, by John Passfield. I'll move my finger there. Okay, now I'll set it down and then I'll read about it so I don't get mixed up. This copy is a manuscript, but there's a copy on my website at johnpassfield.ca, which is available for free to read. All you do is click on the cover icon and the book will be yours. The subtitle is Influences and Elements, as the essays in the book are about the writers who have influenced me and the elements that I've developed in my pursuit of a form for the poetic novel for our time. So I'll read 5 of 11 segments of the essay. I won't read the whole essay, but if you're interested, you can go to my website and read the rest of it. Okay, this then is my response to a discussion of one of those topics which I never considered when I taught literature without being a writer. It's a kind of topic which fascinates me now, as I can relate it to the challenges of planning and writing my own novels and novellas. Now, the essay will involve comments on quotations from an essay called The Introverted Novel by John Fletcher and Malcolm Bradbury, which is printed in the book Modernism, A Guide to European Literature, 1890 to 1930. So I'm writing an essay in response to an essay by Fletcher and Bradbury. So here's a quotation from the essay by Fletcher and Bradbury. The effect of all the 19th century concentration on the novel as an art form was a radical revolution in technique and a vastly greater focus on form. So they're talking about the modernist novel. They're saying it focused on form more so than earlier novels had. Here's my response to that. My thinking about the modernist novel has undergone a transformation during the last few years, I believe. I realized when I began to write my short stories and my first novel that the key to my transition from studying the poetic plays of the past, those of the ancient Greeks and Shakespeare, to writing the poetic novel of the future required an intensive study of the modernists. However, there was very little that I could read that dealt with what perhaps only recently has become a key concern for me, and that concern is as to why the modernist novelists felt the need for a new version of the novel, a modernist novel, instead of what had become the art form of the prose novel. I realized, as all of the critics told me, that the modernists felt that the prose novel dealt with the outside of life, the social life of the human being, and that the novel that they were developing would deal with the inside of life, the psychological processes by which the human beings were living their lives. But I didn't think to ask myself whether they thought that the human being that they were depicting as characters in their works were the everyday people of the earth, or whether they were, in the perception of the modernist authors, exceptional beings. Now this is fascinating to me. Who are these people? Did people undergo a change around the time of the modernist novel, the birth of the modernist novel? Or did the modernist novelists just realize that art had undergone a change, literary art had undergone a change? Which was it? Okay, next section, next quotation. The modernist phenomenon is what might be called narrative introversion. That's Fletcher and Bradbury. The modernist phenomenon, is what might be called narrative introversion. Now, here's my response to that comment. It seems to me that the prose novel deals with the surface of life, with surface thought as a response to life and action, as a demonstration of the thought that is taking place in the mind of the main character. The thought that is reported by the novel, usually by a narrator, but sometimes by the main character, is what I would call consciousness about thought, rather than the process of thought. The main character of the prose novel knows, what he or she thinks and acts in order to put those thoughts into practice, hence the plot of a prose novel. So the character knows something and puts it into practice. That's a prose novel. The poetic novel, in contrast, shows not the surface of thought of the main character, not the understood thought of the main character, not the thought conclusions of the main character about his or her concerns, but the thought process which the main character is undergoing as the main character thinks his or her way through the events and situations of a life that he or she is leading. Unlike the author of the prose novel, the author of the poetic novel does not feel the need to show the main character putting his or her thoughts into action. In fact, as the poetic novel does not show thought conclusions, one might say that a plot in a poetic novel, certainly an ending to a plot, is almost impossible. So there's a big difference between those two kinds of novels. Here's another quotation from Fletcher and Bradbury's essay. It is in modernism that one finds an internal crisis of presentation and a penchant for forms which show the process of a novel's making and dramatize the means by which the narration itself is achieved. So an internal crisis of presentation. In my words, the novel doesn't know what it wants to be. Okay? Well, here's my comment on that. It's unfortunate, I believe, that so many critics of a modernist novel put stress in their response to the novel on the process of the novelist rather than the process of the main character. This quotation suggests that it was the writer at the time of experimentation which led to the modernist novel who became concerned with the finding of form for the creation of a novel. While this is true, in my estimation, what it leaves out is that it is the character who's searching for form in which to embody his or her experience as a means of attempting to perceive potential meaning while undergoing a life experience. So critics tend to talk about the writer searching for form. Yes, he is, but it's the character who's searching for form, which is more important. The modernist novelist was not searching for a new novel form for the sake of novelty, but was searching for a new novel form as a means of showing the thinking process of the human being, which stretches back to the first human being who walked upon the earth. So people didn't change around 1900, but literature had gotten off track, and the modernists were trying to put it back on track. The modernist novelist was searching for a way to get back to the immediacy of the earlier art forms, in particular to the immediacy of the poetic drama. I believe, whether the modernist novelist knew it or not, that they felt that the prose novel did not capture the most dynamic, most interesting, and most important process in human living. Whether one considers the human being to be essentially alone, or one takes the human being to be a social animal. In each case, I believe that the modernists felt, though I've wondered in the last few years whether they realized this, that the prose novel was giving a false impression of the way we live our lives, meaning that the smallest part of our lives concerns the actions that we perform in response to the surface thinking that we do, while the largest part of our lives is the depth thinking that we do in an attempt to explore the potential meaning in our perceived realities and our responses to those perceived realities. Okay, another quotation by Fletcher and Bradbury. Putting the means and modes of the work of art at the center of the work, the writers of modernist novels set limits upon the realistic level of a novel's operation and require our comprehension of this particular order and structure as an articulated whole. So is there less realism in the modernist novel than there is in the so-called realist novel? Here's my response. Form is meaning. Prose form is prose meaning. Poetic form is poetic meaning. Okay, 2 points here. 1, the prose novel asks us to respond to form. So form in the prose novel suggests that the meaning of life is to be found in the sequential actions of a character moving through a plot. All prose novels have the same meaning, in a sense. 2, the poetic novel asks us to respond to form. Form in the poetic novel suggests that the meaning of life is to be found, if found at all, in the contemplation of an idea pattern in the mind of the main character, who may or may not be moving through the actions of a plot. So all poetic novels have the same meaning in a sense. Some critics have felt that the plots of Hamlet or King Lear are not as smoothly sequential as they might have been had Shakespeare been a better plot maker. I won't say that the plots of these two plays are irrelevant, but I will say that the plots of those two plays are, to me, a representation of the fact that we move through time, and that the plays concern themselves with the human phenomenon whereby, as we act and are acted upon, we form image patterns in our mind. So the plot is not so important. We all have a plot. We all move through time. What's important in those plays is the actions of the mind as a response to moving through time. The two literary forms are radically different. The prose form is one of sequential action as a result of thought, and it does not depict thought that is now taking place, since a prose novel tends to be in the past tense, which means that it depicts a recollection of a seemingly logical progression of thought, one thought at a time, in which, now that it's over and can be understood, can be explained to a reader by a main character or a narrator in past tense. Here is how the action that is now complete came to be. On the contrary, the pattern that the poetic novel makes is a pattern of the imagery that is being formed at the present moment in the mind of the main character as he or she is living life and trying to solve a problem, which might or might not require action as part of the solution. So the whole essay is about the difference between the prose novel and the poetic novel. I'll stop there. The rest of the essay can be read on my website, johnpasfield.ca. Now, here's an essay that I wrote as I was reviewing the essay in my book, The Poetic Novel 2. One of the topics about novel writing that's fascinated me for years is the topic of grammatical tense. What has been fascinating for me is to realize that there have been novelists such as Dostoevsky and Henry James who've considered writing their novels in the present tense, but then have backed away and continued writing in the past tense. I think the question of whether to write in present tense or past tense can be approached by asking two questions. Number one, what does the novelist gain or lose by writing in either tense? And number two, what is the presentation of the experience of the main character gain and lose by the use of either tense? So, two different questions. What does the novelist gain and lose? What does the character gain and lose? I suppose we could use the terms the author-centered novel and the character-centered novel. It strikes me that what the author gains or loses by the use of one tense or another is control over or lack of control over the reader. And number two, it also strikes me that what the main character gains or loses by the use of one tense or the other is closeness to and distance from the character. This is a highly complex topic, so perhaps I'll just leave it at that for now and say that I've gone into this topic in a lot more depth in essays like the one from which I've just been reading. As I've said, I've not read this essay in its complete form. If you wish to explore this topic in more detail, have a look at either one of my books of poetic novel exploration, the Poetic Novel 1 and the Poetic Novel 2. So here's the Poetic Novel 2, from which that essay that I've just read has been taken. It's available on my website, johnpasfield.ca. So it's not a physical book. You can't buy it at Amazon or at my author's website. You can get it for free, though, at johnpasfield.ca, if the theory and practice of novel writing is of interest to you. Lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.